The man counted the money twice on the hood of a parked car at 9:20 on a Saturday morning before he let go of the girl's hand. She was 11 years old. She had a school bag on her back with one broken strap that she had tied together herself with a piece of green ribbon. And she was still holding the bag the way a child holds something when she has been told to wait and does not yet understand that the waiting will not end. The man who had counted the money folded the notes into the front pocket of his shirt. The other man, the one who had handed the money over, put his hand on the girl's shoulder and turned her around to face a car she had never seen. She looked back once at the man who had raised her since she was 4. He was already walking the other way, and he did not look back, and she did not know yet that the man walking away had just signed something far larger than a debt, and that the girl in the broken strap bag would one day be the one to read it back to him, word for word, in a room he would not be allowed to leave. Her name was Adora Nwankwo, and she had been born in a 2-room house on Aguilera Street in Onitsha, where the rain came through a patch in the roof that her mother used to catch in a yellow plastic bucket. Her mother had died when Adora was 4 years old, and the man her mother married 8 months before she died, a man named Obinna Achebe, had kept the girl in the house the way a man keeps a chair he has not decided to throw out. She was small for 11. She weighed 28 kilograms, which a nurse at the government clinic on Iweka Road had written on a card with concern in her handwriting. Because Adora had been eating 1 meal a day for most of 2 years so that the food in the house would last longer, and Obinna would not have a reason to send her to her aunt in the village. She wore a faded pink dress that had once belonged to a neighbor's daughter, washed so many times that the flowers on it had become the suggestion of flowers. The dress was clean. She washed it herself at night in the same yellow bucket that had once caught the rain, and she laid it flat on the cement floor to dry because there was no line. She carried one thing that was truly hers. It was a small exercise book with a blue cover, the kind that cost 50 naira at the stall outside the school, and in it she wrote, numbers. Not stories, not drawings. Numbers. She wrote down what things cost. She had watched her mother in the last year of her life count coins onto the table every evening and divide them into small piles for rent, for food, for the candle, for the church, and Adora had decided, in the way a child decides a thing forever, that she would always know where the money went. She wrote down the price of Gary and the price of kerosene and the price of the Okrika dress that cost her stepfather nothing because he took it. She had filled 14 pages. She did not know that the habit of writing down exactly what a thing costs and exactly who paid it was the one thing in that house that no one could take, and that it would still be in her hands 15 years later when it mattered most. Obinna Achebe owed money to a man named Alhaji Danjuma, who lent at the back of a provision shop near the Onitsha main market and kept his own exercise book, a thicker one, bound in brown tape. Obinna had borrowed 180,000 naira over 3 years, a little at a time, and the way Alhaji Danjuma's book worked, 180,000 had become 410,000 by the morning he stopped accepting promises. Alhaji Danjuma was not a violent man. That was the part Adora understood only much later. He did not shout. He wore a clean white kaftan, and he smelled of a tar and engine oil from the generator behind the shop. And when Obinna told him he had nothing left to give, Alhaji Danjuma looked at the girl standing by the door with her broken bag and said, one sentence in a quiet voice the way a man reads a figure off a page. There is the matter of the child. He did not call her a child to be cruel. He called her a child because in his book a person was an entry, and an entry could settle a balance. There were people who saw it happen. There was a woman frying akara in a black pot across the road, and a man selling phone cards from a wooden table, and 2 boys who had stopped their game to watch. The akara woman put down her spoon. She took 1 step off the curb, and then she stopped, because the men were grown, and the matter was money, and she had 4 of her own at home, and a husband who would ask why she had brought trouble into the house. She went back to her pot. She would remember that step she did not take for a long time. Adora would remember it too, though she did not yet have the word for what it was. The small distance between a person seeing a wrong and a person stopping it, the distance that is only 1 step and is also the whole world. The man who took her was not Alhaji Danjuma. Alhaji Danjuma did not deal in children directly. He sold the debt, the way a debt can be sold, to a man called Brother Festus who ran a house in Asaba where girls cooked and cleaned and were not paid and were not let out. And the story that was told to anyone who asked was that the girls were relatives being trained for marriage. Adora arrived at that house at 1:40 in the afternoon. She counted the time because she had a watch with a cracked face that her mother had owned, the only other thing that was hers, and she had learned to read it. There were 6 other girls. The youngest was 9, the oldest was 15 and had been there for 3 years, and spoke very little and had a way of folding the washing into perfect squares, slowly, with her hands flat, as though the cloth were the only thing in the world she was still allowed to be careful with. In that house, Adora learned silence the way the youngest girls learn it everywhere, by watching what happens to the ones who do not learn it. But she did not stop writing. Brother Festus's wife kept the household accounts in her head and on scraps of paper that she lost, and within a year she had begun to hand the market money to Adora because the child could add a column of figures faster than anyone in the house, and never made an error and never, it seemed, took a single naira for herself. This was the thing the framework of that house could not see. They thought they had bought a pair of hands. They had brought a mind into the room and placed it next to the money, and they let it stay there for years. And they taught it without meaning to, exactly how the whole arrangement worked. Who lent, who borrowed, who was sold, and at what figure and to whom. Adora wrote none of it down where it could be found. She wrote all of it down where it could not. She had a second exercise book by then, hidden inside the lining of a mattress, and the pages were full of names and dates and amounts, and beside each entry, in her small, careful hand, a single word that the bookkeepers of that world never used: Aud. There was a woman at the gate of that house, an old woman named Mama Nkiru, who sold roasted corn and ube on a tray balanced on a low stool, and who had sat at that gate for longer than anyone could say. She saw every girl who went in and every car that came out. She said little, but on the afternoons when Adora was sent to buy palm oil and crayfish at the junction, Mama Nkiru would lift one piece of corn off her tray without being paid and put it in the child's hand. And once when Adora's eyes were red and she would not say why, the old woman held the girl's wrist and said something Adora would carry for the rest of her life. Your mind is not their house. Nobody can lock it. Then she let go and turned back to her tray as if she had said nothing, and Adora walked back through the gate with the corn warm in her hand and the sentence warm in her chest. And she did not cry. And she added a line to the book in the mattress that night, because Mama Nkiru, it turned out, knew the names of every man who had ever sold a girl into that house, and had been waiting most of her life for someone to write them down. It seemed for a while that things would soften. A church group came to the house when Adora was 13, a Pentecostal mission that ran a school in Asaba, and offered to take 2 of the girls into a scholarship program. And Brother Festus, who liked to be seen as a generous man and who had grown comfortable enough to be careless, allowed it, because a girl who could read and add was worth more if she could also be shown to a visitor as proof of his goodness. Adora was sent to school 3 mornings a week. She wore a uniform that was too big, and she folded the waistband twice and pinned it, and she sat in the front, and she did not waste a single morning. If this is the part where you think a door has opened, stay with me, because the people who hold girls do not open doors. They widen the cage just enough to keep the animal calm. The school was real, the scholarship was real, but Brother Festus had made a quiet arrangement with the mission's local pastor, a percentage, a finder's fee, the kind of thing that is never written down. And the plan was always that Adora would be returned to the house at 16, educated now, more valuable now, ready to be married off to a man in Lagos, who paid well for wives who could keep books. The widening of the cage was an investment. She did not know this. The old woman at the gate did. Mama Nkiru had heard the pastor and Brother Festus speaking by the wall one evening, and she said nothing to Adora, because there was nothing yet to be done. But she went home that night and lit a candle and did the only thing she knew how to do, which was to remember and to wait. What saved Adora was not a billionaire and not a miracle. It was a teacher, a woman named Mrs. Constance Okoro, who taught mathematics at the mission school and noticed, in the 3rd week of term, that the new girl with the pinned uniform finished the test in 11 minutes and got every question right, and then sat very still with her hands folded as though waiting to be told she had done something wrong. Mrs. Okoro had grown up poor in Enugu and had a way of looking at a child that the child could feel. She began to ask quiet questions. Where do you live? Who are your people? Why do you flinch when the bell rings? Adora answered nothing for a long time because the old woman at the gate had taught her that a locked mind is a safe mind. But over many months, in the corner of a classroom after the others had gone, Adora began to talk, and one afternoon she brought the second exercise book from the mattress, the one with the names and the dates and the word ode written beside each one, and she put it on the desk in front of Mrs. Okoro, and she said, "Only this. I wrote it all down." Mrs. Okoro read the book. Then she read it again, then she closed it and put both her hands flat on the cover the way the oldest girl in the house used to fold the washing, slowly, as though the thing under her hands were the only thing left in the world to be careful with. She did not promise the child anything. She took the book to a legal aid office run by a women's mission in Onitsha, and the lawyers there, who had spent years hearing stories that left no trace, sat in a room and turned the pages of an exercise book written by a child. And for the first time in any of their careers, they were not holding a story. They were holding a ledger. Names, dates, amounts, a second set of books for a world that kept no books. Within 4 months, the house in Asaba was gone, the girls were placed, Brother Festus was arrested at a checkpoint on the road to Lagos, and the name Alhaji Danjuma, and the name of a pastor, and the name Obina Achabi were all written down for the second time in their lives, this time in a file with a number on it, in a building they could not buy their way out of. Adora was 14. The world did not become soft, but it became hers. The women's mission paid for her schooling, and she finished at the top of every class she sat in. And she sat the law entrance examination at 17 and scored higher than every candidate in the state. And she went to the University of Nigeria at Enugu, where she studied law in a small room she shared with 3 other girls. And she paid for her books by keeping accounts for a fabric trader in the market on Saturdays because she had never once stopped knowing exactly where the money went. She kept the cracked watch. She kept the blue exercise book with the prices of Gary and kerosene in a child's hand. And every December she traveled back to Asaba and sat for an hour beside an old woman who still sold roasted corn at a gate that no longer led anywhere. And Mama Nkiru would put one piece of corn in her hand without being paid, and the two of them would not say very much, because there was nothing that needed saying between two people who had carried the same names for the same number of years. By the time she was 26, Adora Nwankwo was a magistrate. By the time the matter reached her court, she was 31. The case had nothing to do with her on paper. It was a civil suit, a dispute over a piece of land in Onitsha, and the man who had brought the suit was an old man now, gray at the temples, walking with a stick, wearing a brown agbada that had been good once and had been mended at the cuff. He had spent his savings on lawyers and lost the land anyway, and he had come to the High Court at Onitsha to argue that the sale had been fraudulent, and his name written on the cause list that the registrar handed up to the bench on a Tuesday morning was Obina Achabi. She read the name. She did not move. The registrar, a careful young man, noticed nothing. The lawyers shuffled their files. Somewhere in the body of the court, a phone was switched to silent. Adora set the cause list down on the desk in front of her. She did not drop it. She set it down, flat, the way a woman sets down a thing she has been waiting 15 years to hold, and she looked across the courtroom at the old man in the mended agbada, and the old man, who did not know her, who had last seen her as an 11-year-old in a broken strap bag and had not looked back, smiled up at the bench the way a man smiles at any judge, hoping to be liked. She could have recused herself. The law would have required it had she declared what she knew. She did not declare it. She did something else which the law also allowed, and which was harder. She heard the case. She heard it exactly as it deserved to be heard, fairly completely, with a patience that the old man's own lawyer remarked on afterward. And she found, on the merits and on the documents, that Obina Achabi had no claim because the man who had sold the land out from under him 15 years ago had done so to settle a debt to a moneylender named Danjuma, a debt that Obina Achabi had once tried to settle by other means. The documents said all of this in the dry language of documents. Adora read them into the record in a level voice, and when she had delivered the judgment when the land was confirmed lost to him for the last time, she did the thing she had come, without knowing it, 15 years to do. She asked him to remain. The court emptied. The lawyers left. The registrar, sensing something, lingered by the door, and then stepped outside. And Adora Nwankwo came down from the bench, which a judge does not do, and she walked across the empty courtroom to the old man who was gathering his papers with shaking hands, and she stood in front of him, and she said her own name. Not her title, her name, Adara, the daughter of Ngozi, from the house on Aguleri Street. The girl you counted twice on the hood of a car and handed to a man and did not look back. His papers stopped moving. His hand hung in the air over the desk and then slowly came down. He did not speak. There was nothing in the rules of any court for the silence that filled that room. She did not raise her voice. She did not weep. She reached into the folder she carried and she put two things on the table in front of him. The first was the brown legal file with a number on it, the file that had ended the house in Asaba, the file with his name in it. The second was a small exercise book with a blue cover, soft now at the corners, the pages filled with the prices of Gary and kerosene, in the careful hand of a hungry child. She opened the blue book to the last page she had written before they took her, and she turned it to face him. And on that page, beside the date and the amount, in a child's handwriting, was the word she had written beside every entry her whole life. Aud. You sold a child to settle a balance, she said. I have spent my life learning to read balances. And then she said the only sentence she had rehearsed, the one she had carried up from the bottom of that yellow bucket and through the gate in Asaba and across every examination hall she had ever sat in. The balance is read. She did not have him arrested. The case for that had passed its time under the law, and she knew the law better than any person in that building, and she would not break it, even for him, because the thing that had saved her was a written record, honestly kept, and she would not now keep a dishonest one. Instead, she did what she had learned at 14, with the only justice that does not rot. She wrote it down. She referred the full file, the names of every man still living who had bought or sold a girl through that house, the money lender, the pastor, the chain of it to a special unit of the State Directorate that prosecuted trafficking, a unit that had not existed when she was a child and existed now in part because a woman named Justice Nwankwo had testified before the committee that created it. The first cases that unit ever brought were drawn from the pages of an exercise book a 14-year-old had put on a teacher's desk. And the training center that the unit opened, the place where new magistrates and police officers were taught to recognize the quiet arithmetic of how a person is turned into a debt, was opened in Onitsha, 4 streets from Aguleri, and the woman who cut the ribbon at the gate was an old corn seller named Mama Nikaru, who had been brought from Asaba in a government car, and who, when they handed her the scissors, held them for a long moment and said she had been waiting most of her life to cut something open instead of watching it close. Obinna Achebe thought, 15 years ago, that he had handed away a problem. He thought a child was a thing that could settle a balance, that a person could be subtracted from his life, like a figure crossed out in a book. But the truth is, the one thing he could never have counted, because it was the one thing he never bothered to look at. He had not handed away a problem. He had handed away the only person in that house who knew how to keep an honest account. And she had kept one every single day for 15 years, and his name had been in it from the start. You can sell a person. The law of some places and the cruelty of every place has always made that possible. You can count the money twice and fold it into your pocket and turn and walk the other way and tell yourself the child was a debt and the debt is now paid. But you cannot decide what that person will become. And you cannot reach into a mind that an old woman at a gate has already told her belongs to no one but herself. And you cannot erase a thing that has been written down honestly by someone who was watching the whole time. The people who think they are handing a child an ending are sometimes, without knowing it, handing her the one skill that will outlast every wall they ever built. And the morning he counted the money on the hood of that car was the last morning of his life in which he had power over anything at all. Because while he was folding the notes into his shirt pocket and walking away without looking back, a small girl with a broken school bag was already doing the things she would do for the rest of her life. She was watching. She was remembering. And somewhere in a book that no one thought to take from her, she was writing it all down. If a man sold you when you were a child, counted you like coins, and walked away, certain you were finished, and 15 years later he was standing in front of you, not knowing who you had become, asking you for fairness, would you give it to him? Could you sit on that bench and judge his case honestly, on the merits, when every part of you remembered the hood of that car? And here is the harder question, the one I really want you to sit with. If you found you could do it, if you could be fair to the man who was never once fair to you, would that be weakness, or would that be the exact moment you finally became free of him? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world counts as nothing until the day they count everything back. I'll see you in the next one.